When emotions are running high, one of the most powerful things you can learn in life is the discipline of silence. You see, it's easy to speak when you're angry. It's easy to lash out when you're hurt. But what's easy to do is often not the best thing to do. And here's something worth remembering. Your words, once spoken, can't be taken back. That's why silence in emotionally charged situations isn't just a virtue. It's wisdom in action. Now let me share something that changed my perspective. I once heard someone say, "Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions." That hit me hard. Because how many times have we said something we didn't mean simply because we felt overwhelmed in the moment? And after the heat cools down, we look back and wish we had paused, wished we had thought, wished we had just stayed silent. You see, silence isn't weakness. It's strength under control. When emotions are boiling, silence gives you space to reflect, to observe, to gain clarity. It's a conscious choice not to allow anger, jealousy, fear, or frustration to run your mouth for you. Because here's the truth. When emotions speak, logic often leaves the room. Let's talk about personal relationships. How many arguments escalate because someone couldn't hold their tongue? How many friendships have ended? How many families torn apart simply because someone reacted instead of responding? Silence allows you to take a step back and ask yourself, is this the hill I want to die on? Is what I'm about to say going to heal, or is it going to hurt? In business, in leadership, in everyday human interaction, this principle applies. The leader who speaks out of anger may lose respect. The employee who sends that fiery email may burn a bridge. The parent who scolds out of frustration may damage more than discipline. But the person who can stay silent in the storm, who can wait for emotions to settle before speaking, that person builds influence, trust, and inner peace. Here's what silence does. It gives you time. Time to think, time to understand, time to respond with intelligence instead of instinct. Think of it as buying time with patience. Because, and this is key, emotional intelligence starts with self-regulation. You can't control the situation, but you can always control yourself. And let me tell you something else. Sometimes silence is the best answer. Not because you don't have something to say, but because you've grown wise enough to know that saying it right now would only make things worse. You don't win every battle by fighting. Some victories come through restraint, through holding your peace, through walking away when you could have exploded. I've been there. I've said things in a moment of heat that I later regretted. And every time I've managed to stay silent instead of reacting emotionally, I've never regretted it. Not once. Because silence gives you the upper hand. Not over the other person, but over yourself. And that's the real battle. Self-mastery. So let's be clear. Silence doesn't mean indifference. It doesn't mean you're weak or that you don't care. It means you're choosing to respond at the right time, with the right words, in the right spirit. That's wisdom. And wisdom is always more powerful than noise. Practice this. The next time emotions rise, pause. Take a deep breath. Step back. Ask yourself, what will this sound like tomorrow? A week from now, will I be proud of what I said? If the answer is no, choose silence. It's not easy, but it's necessary, because the person who learns to stay silent when emotions are high is the person who leads their life by design, not by default. Remember, life is a series of decisions, and the quality of your decisions is often shaped by the clarity of your mind. Emotions cloud judgment, but silence clears the fog. And when the fog clears, you can see the road ahead. Not just where you're standing, but where you're going. So make silence your ally. Make it your teacher. And the next time you're tempted to speak out of anger, remind yourself, silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. When you don't have all the facts, the most intelligent thing you can do is stay silent. Why? Because speaking without understanding is like shooting in the dark. You may hit something, but chances are it won't be the target. And often the damage done in ignorance can be far more severe than anything caused intentionally. In life, in business, in relationships, speaking before knowing is a risk you cannot afford to take. There's a phrase I've always remembered: better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. That speaks to a timeless truth. People respect silence when it's purposeful. They understand when you choose to listen, observe, and ask questions before forming your opinion. On the other hand, those who speak first, loudest, and most often without knowing the full story, usually lose credibility quickly. Information is power, but only when it's complete. Jumping to conclusions is like building a house on a cracked foundation. Everything looks fine at first, but eventually things start to fall apart. When you don't have all the facts, your mind will often try to fill in the blanks with assumptions, emotions, and guesses. And assumptions are the enemy of accuracy. That's why silence becomes a sign of wisdom, because you are choosing not to build a conclusion on half-truth. Think about this in a practical way. In the workplace, decisions are often made quickly, and opinions can spread even faster. If you're the person who always has something to say, even when you're unsure, you might get attention, but you won't get trust. Leaders, real leaders, listen deeply before they speak. They ask questions. They take time to see all sides of the issue before offering a response. And when they do speak, their words carry weight because they are rooted in clarity, not conjecture. In personal relationships, this is just as important. How many arguments begin with someone accusing the other based on something they think they know? I heard you said this. I assumed you meant that. When we react without checking the full context, we often do more harm than good. Staying silent doesn't mean you're ignoring the issue. It means you're giving yourself the time to understand it. That's respect for the other person and for the relationship. And let's not forget the role of silence in learning. When you're new in a room, new to a subject, or simply facing a situation where you're not the expert, don't fake it. Don't pretend you know more than you do. The best way to learn is to ask, not assert, to listen, not lecture. You'll be surprised how much people are willing to teach you if they sense you're there to learn, not to impress. Staying silent doesn't mean staying uninvolved. It means listening with intent to gain knowledge that will help you contribute in a more meaningful way later. There's another reason to pause before speaking without all the facts. Things are not always as they seem. People carry unseen burdens. Circumstances have hidden layers. Information is often incomplete, biased, or misunderstood. You might think you know the whole story, but there's always more beneath the surface. And if you've already formed your opinion and voiced it publicly, it can be very hard to walk that back. That's why silence buys you time. Time to gather facts, to seek understanding, and to make sure your response aligns with the truth, not just your perception. And here's something very important. When you do speak, people listen differently if they've watched you stay silent until you were sure. Your words have more influence, not because you speak often, but because you speak wisely. People don't remember how many times you chimed in. They remember the moments you said something meaningful. And meaning comes from knowledge. Accurate, clear, grounded knowledge. Not assumption, not guesses, not hearsay. So train yourself to pause, to observe, to wait. Ask questions like, do I know the full story? Is this information verified? Am I responding to what's true, or just what I feel? Those few seconds of silence can make the difference between building trust or breaking it, between solving a problem or becoming one. In this fast-paced world, there's pressure to react quickly, to speak up fast, to show that you're informed. But remember, fast doesn't always mean smart, and loud doesn't always mean right. The person who can sit quietly while the noise swirls around them, gathering facts, studying the landscape, and forming a clear picture before speaking, that person will always have the advantage. So if you don't have all the facts, don't rush to speak. Instead, Lean into the power of silence, because it is in that silence that your wisdom grows. If your words won't add value, then it's often best to remain silent. This is one of the most underrated and yet most powerful disciplines a person can learn. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, those who choose to speak only when it matters carry a different kind of influence. An influence rooted in purpose, not noise. You see, there's a difference between talking and contributing. The first fills time, the second fills needs, and the gap between the two is filled with silence, intentional, thoughtful, strategic silence. There's a natural human desire to participate, to offer input, to feel important in a conversation. But sometimes that desire drives us to speak when our words aren't actually moving the needle. Before you say something, ask yourself, will this add value? Will this solve a problem, offer encouragement, provide clarity, or inspire growth? If the answer is no, then silence might be the wiser path. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't speak at all, of course not. But when we speak just to fill space, to hear our own voice, or to appear smart, we often miss the opportunity to make a real difference. Value-driven communication requires intention. It means you've taken the time to think, to reflect, and to understand the purpose behind your words. It means you're not just reacting, you're contributing. Let's look at this in a team or work setting. Have you ever been in a meeting where someone constantly chimes in without really saying anything useful? Over time, their voice loses weight. People begin to tune them out, because frequency without substance leads to irrelevance. On the other hand, the person who speaks less but offers insight, direction, or clarity when they do, well, that person gets remembered. Their words cut through the noise because people know that when they speak, there's something worth hearing. The same principle applies in personal conversations. Sometimes someone just needs to talk, to express themselves, to be heard. In those moments, your value isn't found in fixing the problem or offering your opinion. It's found in your silence, your presence, your attention. Just being there, fully present, without jumping in with advice or criticism, is a gift. Not every conversation needs your commentary. Sometimes your value is in being the one who listens well. There's also the matter of timing. Even good words, if said at the wrong time, can lose their value. Wisdom knows when to speak and when to wait. You might have a great idea, a powerful truth, or a valid correction, but if the moment isn't right, it may fall flat or even cause harm. Silence allows you to choose your moment carefully, so that when you do speak, your words land with precision and purpose. And let's not forget about social media, a place where people often speak without pausing to consider whether their input adds any real value. So many posts are reactive, driven by emotion, by the need to be seen or heard. But value-based communication asks, what is the impact of what I'm about to say?